Thanks for coming, folks. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to the roundtable specifically on COVID, theater, and the future, sponsored by the Eugene O'Neill Foundation, the Eugene O'Neill Society, and organized by David Palmer, the Society's conference coordinator. O'Neill Society Secretary Treasurer Patrick Midgley handled the publicity with a welcome push from our good friends at the Metropolitan Playhouse in New York. My name is Alex Pettit. I am professor of English at the University of North Texas, editor of the Eugene O'Neill Review. We're making this recording on June 3rd, 2021 for presentation at the annual conference of the American Literature Association to be held in Boston, July 7 through 11 of this year. Our discussants today are actor and director Annabel Capper, extensive of credit and during the pandemic, principally associated with New York's Bedlam Theater Company. Geoff Elliott and Julia Rodriguez-Elliot, producing directors of A Noise Within Theater in lovely Pasadena. Eric Fraisher Hayes, artistic director of the Eugene O'Neill Foundation in Danville, California. Will Long, I'm a big fan, California-based actor who spent the pandemic acting in Eugene O'Neill Foundation productions, moonlighting with the Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse, and participating in socially distanced, sponsored by the National Park Service. I'm still letting people in, so you'll have to a little bit of the stutter step here. Ciarán O'Reilly, known to many of you, co-founder and producing director of the Irish Repertory Theater in New York, and Alex Rowe, producing artistic director of the Metropolitan Playhouse and Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse, New York. Okay, welcome panelists, and again, so very much for your generous use. By way of getting going and introducing this fine group to the audience, both here today and at the ALA conference next month, I'd like to solicit quick, short, just kind of saying hello responses to the following question. Where were you when the lights went out? And what were your initial responses to the shutdown? Expectations, anxieties, and so forth. What I'm trying to do is capture a moment here. Alex, you've written about this in the Eugene O'Neill Review. Perhaps you could start us off. Are you ready?
Already, thank you very much, Alex.
Go for it.
It's well, thank you for this. Thank you for all your support, and thanks to you and David and the O'Neill Society for the opportunity. I was when the lights went out, I was right where I am now, which is in the auditorium at Metropolitan Playhouse, and we were about to open D.W. Gregory's play Radium Girls in a week when we had a cast meeting, and some folks were concerned that the subways might shut down, so we wouldn't be able to get back from rehearsal. And some were concerned that no one would come to see the show, and if they did, they would make each other sick. And our response was to defer the play for about 2 weeks, say, well, a couple weeks we'll be able to open it up. And most of the cast left town. One went off to Memphis, one went off to California the day after we decided we were going to postpone. We kept kicking it down the road, and then we finally decided that we won't be able to do it until maybe later this year, but that is our plan. And personally, I kept traveling back and forth from the theater, collecting belongings and taking them home where I could work from the home office. And then we started the Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse on March 28th, which is a story to come.
Annabel, how about you?
Hi, thank you. It's very nice to be here. I was in New York City. I was waiting to shoot a TV drama set in a hospital. So I had my costume fittings and read through in a hospital that was treating patients with COVID. So I was starting to get a little anxious that this filming wasn't going to happen, and not at all surprised. And then, of course, I got the call at about 11 p.m. that night from the second AD of the show to say, a bit like Alex just said, we can't film tomorrow, or things are a bit crazy, but we'll probably come back next week. And of course, that didn't happen. But yeah, stayed in New York the whole time, but went home and then waited to see what would happen next. which we will talk about, of course.
That was obviously a tough time to be in New York. I heard from so many people near and dear to me. Will, how about the West Coast? Tell us about where you were and how you responded.
Yeah, well, it's a perfect bridging the gap, because I was actually leaving New York and arriving in California as this, it was a kind of multi-step process of how, what's really happening here. And I first heard about this, the virus while I was in New York. And as I was in California, potential show transfers in New York started getting canceled, and the possibility of returning there did not seem fruitful. And so I stayed. And, Eric Fraisher Hayes is my longtime West Coast theater mentor. And I immediately reached out to him and said, okay, so what's happening? And, he'll tell you more than I will about how we approached it. But pretty much from the get-go, I pretty much left New York and came to California, having just auditioned for Alex Rowe at the Metropolitan Playhouse, and was driven into the arms of Eric Fraisher Hayes in Danville. So this is an appropriate panel for me, and certainly bridging the gap from New York to California.
Well, at least you were in company, the early going. Eric, how do you remember that conversation and your own responses from your neck of the woods?
Yeah, we had a series of staged readings planned, and they were already sold out. And like a good theater person, I was just, thinking, how can the show go on? So there was all this reimagining of how to do it, whether it needed to be done now outside. And ultimately, it became very clear that it wasn't practical, and so it got put off. But I got to say, at first we just put it off for about a month, very Pollyanna-ish, like a lot of people this first few weeks. Thought, oh well, maybe this will blow over, and of course that was not the case. And so ultimately I had to go about reimagining that program that got canceled much later into the summer, in an outdoor recorded environment at socially distance. But yeah, I was like a lot of people thinking, not realizing how long it would go.
Absolutely. Ciarán, how about you? I think you were in New York, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, I was in New York. We had 2 shows running at that time, and one of them was Paul Muldoon's In Cantata, that had finally, the New York Times published a rave review just as we were about to say, let's close down. So that was fun. And we had another show, Lady G, playing downstairs in our studio theater. And we were doing our final run through of A Touch of the Poet. So all the sets had been built, all the costumes had been made, everything was ready. And so as soon as the other shows were edging towards their end of their run, we were on our way to get onto the stage. And we had another show as well that was about to start rehearsals. And just like everybody is saying here, we were in denial. We did not, we just said, okay, so guys, we're going to take a week or 2 off here. Well, let's get on Zoom during the week and we'll keep our lines up. And we did that, and we did it bitterly until we said, I don't think we need to do this anymore. So that happened. And then we started we started, like the Metropolitan, we started a thing called The Show Must Go On line. And we began doing small bits and pieces and then moved into larger productions.
Wonderful. We'll certainly hear more about The Show Must Go Online later. It's been quite a success from what I understand, not only is following these things, but also quite partially as a viewer. Julie and Geoff, I mean, like the other people on this panel, you've been at this for a while. Anything in your experience that could have gotten you ready for this? How did you all respond?
Well, given that we founded the company in 1891, we've been at it for a while.
And yet you're still only 46, I think.
That's right.
That's right. And I look damn good, if you ask me.
I think so too. I was going to say that.
Before we had to shut down, we had just opened The Winter's Tale. And because we run in true rotating repertory, 2 weeks after opening Winter's Tale, we were to open Alice in Wonderland. And the week after we opened Winter's Tale, we were in a staff meeting, and I remember telling everybody, this COVID thing's, it's just going to blow over. I can't imagine. I certainly can't imagine that California is going to force us not to have assembly. That's just not going to happen. A week later, on Saturday night, we opened Alice in Wonderland, and the next day we shut down.
Actually, there was a school bus on the way because we were doing our first student matinee of Alice in Wonderland, and the school called and said, guess what, we're not coming. And at that point we knew that that it was really serious.
Yeah.
And so we did pretty much what everyone else did. We thought it was gonna, be over in a couple of weeks. Then that turned into a month. And then eventually we began virtual programming, started with our Fridays at 5 panels and readings. And then eventually that led to filming of a couple of productions.
Well, let me stick with you two just for a moment. It seems to me, if I'm reading the timeline right, that you folks got Alice in Wonderland up and screening pretty doggone quickly. I mean, how long did that take? And as technically as you'd like to in the answer, how did you get it done as quickly as you seem to have? I mean, this comes out of absolutely nowhere. You're ready to open, and then you're working in a medium that you may or may not have any experience in, but probably don't have much recent experience. So talk to us about that, please.
Yeah, it wasn't that quick in that we just recently released it. The Alice film, Elliot actually came before that, but it was about 7 to 8 months into the pandemic, I guess, that we released Alice in Wonderland, and it came with huge challenges because you're talking about a very physical production where people hug, they sing, they touch, they do all these things, and so all of a sudden you're dealing with not only the language of film and how to create that in a way that still feels like a theatrical experience for an audience, but how do you keep actors 6 feet apart and still have it be something that is theatrically viable. So, it was very challenging. And I think it was also, it presented incredible creative opportunities. So I think that as theater people, we always know that we can always solve a problem if we know what it is. And so how to create that sense of intimacy in scenes where there were actors that were together, how to completely replace things like, an actor is being carried by a bird, and how do you articulate that in a different way? So a lot of challenges, but I think a lot of creative opportunities as well.
But we were very lucky. The universe kind of took care of us because an Iliad, which is a one-person show with in our production, a cellist, that was the first thing that we filmed. So it gave us the opportunity to put together a filmmaking team for an Iliad, and that made it easier for us to move on and film Alice.
If I had to guess, I say that probably an Iliad is one of the shows that's done very well nationally in the last year. It was on a roll, certainly in the DFW Metroplex, and I know elsewhere before then, and it does indeed seem to be. First of all, it's just it's a wonderful play, of course, and so well suited to the present circumstances. Now, okay, how you were talking about working with the actors in new ways. Let's hear from some of the actors here today about how they had to adjust their work in this suddenly new environment. Annabel, one of the things I noticed about your extensive record was that it seems to me, and please tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me that after having put up acting credentials in film, TV, radio, and of course theater, you got into directing right about the time all hell broke loose.
Yeah, that was one of those, again, happy accidents, sort of stars aligning moments. I'd spoken with Eric Tucker, the artistic director of Bedlam, a few years ago about wanting to simply read a play called Entertaining Mr. Sloan by Joe Orton. So we planned to read this at one point, and then when Eric set up the Do More readings that Bedlam ran every 2 weeks for the whole of 2020, which were our sort of, twice a month readings, raising lots of money for various charities, he emailed me out of the blue and said, why don't you do Entertaining Mrs. Sloan? So I directed scenes and worked a lot with actors one-on-one and done sort of parts of plays before, but never a whole production. So of course I jumped in because I love that play so much, and I was so thrilled to be asked. So it was first of all, it was a very interesting time to be doing that because we were doing this online. So I never imagined I'd be doing it in that format over Zoom. But what I did love about it, and what Julia just said there in terms of opportunities, it really talk about a crash course in kind of jumping in and looking after actors and how you manage them and take care of them and help them fly. And this was in the middle of July last year when everyone's feeling extremely vulnerable and scared and all of that sort of stuff. So it was sort of perfect, that play, because it's a slightly kinky, perverted play. But I went all out. I don't know why. I felt ready for it. I felt ready. I approached the 5 days of rehearsal for that, how I'd always seen myself approaching maybe a 4-week rehearsal period. Of course, doing it over this medium is another conversation, but it did go very well, and it was received very well, and I loved every second of it. So on the back of that, Eric then asked me to direct another 2. So I continued to direct throughout the year. Of course, now I'm waiting to direct in the room. That's my next leap. Once we're out there.
To what extent has what you learned as a director in this totally crazy situation, to what extent is that preparing you more work as a director? I mean, it's kind of a funny question because maybe the answer is obvious, but I'll say to me, it's not. I mean, will you have to relearn? What are some of the challenges that you think will face you as, in a sense, a new director all over again?
Yeah. Well, one thing I found very helpful just over this medium, which I would love to continue in the room, of course, as we're getting used to this medium, just this way of communicating over this and the talking over each other and the losing sound when people talk at once, in that first rehearsal, that first reading of Sloan, I would say that I would interrupt actors when they didn't need to be interrupted because I wanted to take care of them so much and sort of reach through the screen to get to them. That sometimes I could see my talking and finding my way through this medium might have interrupted their flow, their process, their whatever they were trying out. So one thing I will take from working in this medium into the room is simply giving actors that space when they're discovering things and trying things out and not leaping in to help or assist until that moment arises. So in a way, it made me extra sensitive, I would say, because this communication is so specific. It's limited in some ways, but it's also very revealing because we're in close up all the time, including you, when you're directing like this. But in terms of going into the room, how it's going to be, I mean, I've had a sort of halfway house because I worked on a project in February of this year in New York that was produced by PBS, that was a sort of hybrid art installation theater piece. So we did it outside in 5 different outdoor locations in New York City, in the middle of winter, snowing, freezing. We weren't sure if anybody was going to come. The audiences came because people were so starved. But what was very interesting, the first day we were together, we started the rehearsals on Zoom for a couple of days, and then we were able to meet in a space, masked, distance. And that first day of being together was extremely heightened. And you could see that actors were unused to being together and clumsy. We were knocking things over. We were knocking chairs over. We sort of lost our spatial awareness. We'd lost some of that sensitivity, some of that periphery vision. So you could see that we were just sort of so shocked in a way to be in a room together that we were unnerved. But of course, within a couple of hours, we were back in, and it was wonderful. But yes, I think just like people are discovering now as they're going back out into the world and society and having to be re-socialized in a way. We think we may have to do this in the rehearsal room, but artists are such extraordinary creatures. I don't know if it's going to take us as long as we might be fearful of. I think we might just be ready to jump in that pool when the moment arrives.
Well, I will certainly hope so. And thank you for that wonderful and deeply informative response. I note in passing, as a Joe Orton fan, that some of my most pleasant experiences as a viewer during this terrible period have involved farces. Alex Rowe staged just a wonderfully silly William Dean Howells play. Alex, I can't remember the title, but it was, mistaken identities on the train and everything. And it was just so funny and so delightful. And for about 45 minutes, I just forgot, right? And there are all sorts of reasons to go to the theater, but in the last year, that seemed like a pretty good one. Will, you and Eric had at least an analogous experience to Annabelle's. You worked together on what turned out to be a filmed production of three of Eugene O'Neill's lost plays. As I recall, you're in The Web and Abortion. You must have really bombed the audition for Recklessness because Eric didn't cast you in that one. Sorry, man, nothing I can do about it. But those, I believe you folks were working on before. I can't really remember. But Will, why don't you tell us about your experiences during an actor? I've had the pleasure of seeing you live. And I've also now had the pleasure of seeing you on film. Now, certainly you made it look easy, but I bet it wasn't. Can you tell us about that, please?
Well, thank you for your kind words and compliments. I appreciate that. Yeah, the experience of acting during this time, there have been different aspects of it to really oversimplify acting. There's, kind of a technical element and an emotional element. And the way that those two things were affected, I was acutely aware of, sometimes more than others. Just to address the actual Zoom performances, which is not how the format of those three plays that you were talking about. But the Zoom performance, the technical aspect of it was so foreign because it wasn't even analogous to film. Working on the computer, there were so many technical changes in terms of, the potential of even having your script on the screen while you're performing. In fact, the script may even be blocking one of your scene partners. You may be doing the performance itself in your own room, your bedroom, which can actually provide a little bit of emotional enhancement because of the familiarity and safety of the environment. It was another world, and I think Alex Rowe said in the article that he wrote, he addressed that really well. But the filming that you're referring to was so early in the pandemic, and we were in fact socially distant in person with the other actors. It was frankly scary at times. We had to really put our faith in each other, and such is the love that we have for performance, to take the proper precautions and protocols to make sure that we could do it in this kind of sanctuary, which was outside and socially distanced. One of the more interesting aspects of abortion was that my character was suffering from consumption, which of course is an airborne respiratory disease. And despite the play being 100 years old, and it was incredibly relevant, not just because of the consumption, but the fact that the play Abortion deals with abortion. And so the kind of women's health rights and airborne respiratory virus, I mean, it was written 100 years ago, and it was incredibly relevant to everything we were experiencing there. So there's some legacy for O'Neill. But, if my character, when my character coughed, from his consumption, everybody's reaction of moving back was pretty natural. You know, there was
Yeah.
something, kind of immersive for the artists about doing that. And it wasn't really planned, but it just kind of appeared. So, uh, there were immense challenges, immense differences. Whether or not we can actually call it theater is again another philosophical question for the ages. But what we were trying to do was entirely in line with the mission statement as performing artists, and so for that, it was beneficial and true.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And you folks certainly made that work. I want to hear from Eric, please, Eric, about some of the ways in which you had to adjust your practice as a director in preparing those 3 films, which, from my probably biased point of view, were just extremely successful. And hey, to put in a plug, all 3 of those short films are available on the Eugene O'Neill Foundation's website, and well worth viewing. Eric, all of a sudden, Eric's having audio issues. We're going to get back to him, which is fine. We'll touch back on him. But Ciarán, I've got a big one for you here, because technically, in other ways, you just kind of blew my mind in the last year. Never had a chance to see Touch of a Poet performed before. I enjoyed your work thoroughly, and I was just kind of astonished by your use of the green screen technique, learning, for example, that green screens don't really have to be green. That confuses me about as much as I can't even dig out of that hole. So rather than nattering on and just showing how little I know about this kind of thing, I would like you to explain to us, if you could, how you had actors from, I believe you said in your introductory comments, all over the United States. I seem to recall someone was in Montana and someone was here and someone was there, doing scenes together, or so it seemed. It's a very different way of handling Zoom theater, and one that I at least didn't see elsewhere. And Ciarán has been really good about sharing the films. Some are still available. Check them out. But tell us about that technique, some of the challenges, and if it's not impolite to ask, how the heck you did it.
Oh, sure. Well, one of the first plays we did was Molly Sweeney, which is a Brian Friel play. It has 3 people in 3 different locations. So we didn't need any green screens for that. The problem came when we wanted to bring everybody into the same room. And so the first play that we did was The Weir. And basically,
one room, right?
It was one pub. It's a little pub in County Leitrim, Ireland, where 5 characters come in and drink at that pub, and stories are told. So by using so we shipped out from the Irish Rep, we shipped it out to 5 actors who were actually happened to be in 5 different states, and we shipped them out their whatever costumes we happened to have left over from a production we had done before. We sent them props, like, so they'd all be drinking from the same pint glasses, the same bottles, the same whatever, anything that anybody had a shared prop, we sent them. So we out to them, and basically we with green screens and lighting equipment, all which could be bought on Amazon.com. So we were relying on, on FedEx or UPS to get them the stuff into their homes. And the actors lived in various, in various means. Some of them lived in their country houses. Others lived in tiny studio apartments. And some people had lawn mowers going outside, and others had hammers. So we basically shot it with an iPhone, where they self-recorded at an iPhone, but they connected with each other on Zoom. So they would be using their laptop to hear the lines being thrown to them. And I, as the director of it, my job was just generally telling them which way to look. He's looking to your right, he's down to your, he's sort of, and you have to remember where you were, he's sort of down to your diagonal left. He's standing up now. No, he's sitting down now. So you need to just, point your way down to her. And then the other person would have to then do it and turn around to be this way. So we came. So they filmed it on their own iPhones, and then they sent in via Dropbox. They sent the files each day from that, and we took them and we edited them together. And then our scenic designer would then put in the settings behind, and there were there were 3D settings, so it didn't seem like it was just like a drop that was back there. So you actually did feel and get the sense that everybody was in the same pub, and everybody everybody. So you'd pull a pint of beer in New Jersey and handed it over to somebody in North Carolina, and you hoped it had the same amount of froth on the top of that at that pint when it left New Jersey.
I must say, transmitting beer over the internet sounds like paradise to me. It worked, it worked extremely well. And I find myself, at least as I try to conceptualize some of this material, back to where we were in wonderful chat with Annabel just a moment ago. You've been directing for a long time. And what you're describing sounds to me like it's very occasion specific, right? Like
Yes.
he's
Yeah.
to your left diagonally. I mean, you're not used to directing that way, I assume, and your actors aren't used to being directed that way. I mean, I'm not asking to see the bloopers.
No, it's not. Well,
There's a lot of trouble.
I will say that in the A Touch of the Poet and The Weir and Molly Sweeney are all shows that we had the great good fortune to have already worked on in a rehearsal hall. So we didn't have to. It wasn't like we had to sit down with a table read and to find out who we are and break down characters and all the stuff that was done. So they had a lot of it in their bones already. So a lot of it was just trying to find their way, and just as Annabel said, I mean, like trying to just make it, imagine that person, you're looking to that person's eyes and you're saying these things where all you're looking at is a damn iPhone, and you're hearing the voices of them coming, but they don't even get to look at the iPad where those actors are. And it was really tough for them. And it was really, I mean, it's the O'Neill, A Touch of the Poet was really tough because you have to go to emotional depths, and to try to find those emotional depths in your own living room with a screen and try to bring yourself into it. It was tough going. It was tough going.
Of course, in Touch of a Poet, so much of the emotional intensity is triangulated, right?
Yes.
It's not. I mean, it's not just two people sitting in a room. It's three people going in and out of a room and interacting really intensely with one another.
Oh yeah, and then we had
visually, right?
a bunch of louts that came in and were dropped by, and there was also and there's also Jamie, who happened to be in Berlin. So he was in Berlin, shooting it, and he we'd be, and the other guy was in New Jersey, and Bob Cuccioli was here in New York. So it was, to be looking over a table, like talking to each other. And he's in Berlin and he's in New York, and then recording it and putting it into the same room afterwards. It was
well, wonderful. I will say, just as an aside, I thought your Jamie Cregan was absolutely wonderful. A standout in a strong performance. I think Eric Hayes has joined us again. Eric, are you back online here?
Yeah, I'm on a borrowed computer, but yes.
Okay. Well, we can see you. We can hear you. You're doing fine. You want to ask you a question, then move back to Alex. But Will gave us a nice rundown on the pleasures and challenges of working with you on the Lost plays, in which his acting certainly was wonderful, as was directing. It seems to me, and I should say that Eric and I are fairly regularly in touch, so I have a pretty good sense of how he's been spending the last year or so. And it just seems to me that you've been running around trying to find boxes to think outside of, and that you've done so with sort of dizzying success, right? National Park Services work coming up, working with Alex on the wonderful version of that wonderful production of O'Neill's Shell Shocked, your own Lost plays, the Ghosts of Dollhouse series. Can you maybe tell us about that diversity of experience and how it made you change your practices as a director, how directing socially distanced was different, how doing this work in film, how clearly feeling some sort of a pressure to come up with new stuff all the time. Talk to us about that, if you will.
Okay, thank you. I'd have to say I was heavily influenced by the early days of the pandemic, watching other people's Zoom presentations. Alex Rowe, thank you for the invitation to work with you. That was by far my best Zoom experience working with the Metropolitan. Generally, I got really sick of looking at people's kitchens that first few months, and so I really felt the idea of the actors being in the shared space was really crucial for me. And so obviously you had to figure out a way to do it safely. And one benefit or asset that I have that many other theater practitioners have not had this last year is I have Eugene O'Neill's barn, which is basically an outdoor space. And I have 13-acre, I call it my 13-acre film lot, where I basically have all these different backdrops and locations, and I've got this beautiful natural surroundings of the Los Trampas Hills behind it. And so I just kind of decided I really need to, the two things that people haven't been able to have here the last year, obviously, are the live performances, but they haven't actually been able to tour Dow House, which is the national park in the hills of Danville. And so the idea of the plays in the place was really crucial to me. And being cinematic was very crucial to me. And then also all the practicalities, thinking of The Ghosts of Dow House are a series of short films where I work with just a solo actor outdoors. That felt like the safe way to go. And I guess one thing I'm just thinking about is the safety thing was the real key. One thing I don't know if Will mentioned with the Lost plays was, and actually I've had no one comment on this, but I usually do staged readings as script and hand performances. And what I mean by that is I basically treat it like a real play. I work on a very limited, quick, like 3-day turnaround kind of thing for one of these performances. And I applied that to our Lost plays. And normally I would not, we block the play, but obviously in this case, everything had to be 6 feet apart, with O'Neill plays, a lot of people die. So then the 6 feet become the person's on the ground and the other person's standing up, but somehow they were always keeping their distance. But to help the audience feel comfortable, I put music stands on stage. And normally I wouldn't do that. And for me, it was an attempt to make a visual cue to remind, because at that point I was apprehensive about the audience feeling uncomfortable about people sharing a space. And I always wanted to have there sort of be this visual that said, no, they're keeping their distance as they work through this. But yeah, I guess I'm going to say I've also become sort of an amateur photographer during this pandemic. So I'm just putting, one of the real developments for me is just a real appreciation of the visual aesthetics. Not that it wasn't important before, but it's really been heightened through the experience working this year.
Well, wonderful. And with respect to those music stands and some of the other things we've been talking about, not necessarily want to go there, but there is something of like this Brechtian orgy going on in pandemic theater. By God, you're always being reminded that it happens, that it's happening, right? You're never allowed to lose yourself. And that feels okay in context. It's strange in naturalistic theater, but it creates different resonances. And from a viewer's perspective, at least, there are resonances that create new meanings. Now, Alex Rowe, you were rehearsing the Radium Girl when all this stuff hit. You threw that aside and got right into the Gerstenberg play. Okay. We've talked a bit, and you've written eloquently about, in an essay I'm going to share with the group later, your experience sort of moving from the Hollywood Squares, we just started doing this Zoom reading, to something much more sophisticated, something much more fleshed out. And I'm speaking technically as well as with respect to actors' performances and so forth. I understand you prepared a little slideshow, you call it, for us, And I'm hoping you might share that with us.
Well, of course, I'd be only too happy to, but thank you very, very much, Alex, and everyone for
that
your
was kind of a setup.
credits. This is where it would be a very good idea. This is where it'd be a great idea for those who are watching to be sure that I'm on speaker view, so that, not to be narcissistic, but that my screen is larger than it might be in a group of 40 others. Because I have found myself to be becoming kind of a Zoom whisperer. And we figured out a lot about how to use the medium. You know, I so admire the work that Ciarán had done, particularly The Touch of a Poet, which was brought to my attention early, but I've been a fan of the Irish Rep forever. And others who found ways of recreating theater on screen. But we decided to invest very, very heavily in the medium rather than trying to create the illusion that we weren't producing Zoom readings. So we both wanted to make use of this format and to do it live all the time. So we weren't getting feeds and then reassembling them, creating more polished videos, because that really is what's so vital to me about being in the room and establishing that sense of connection with people, that we're here, we're live, we're doing it right now for you, and that's what counts. And in many cases, that meant even underscoring the separation. So we would have a mismatch prop. Somebody would hand off a pint glass and someone would grab a wine glass, and that was the wrong color liquid in it, and that was the joke. Just to constantly remind people, kind of pointing to our mask, I guess, as the Romans would have said. But it did, yeah, so we began, this is where the slideshow starts. We began with a very, oh gosh, I just messed up, rudimentary reading of Alice Gerstenberg's He Said, She Said. Now this is her heart's Zoom actors, sitting in front of blank backgrounds. And that was charming. There were some PowerPoint slides that we threw in, but soon enough, we realized that wasn't going to keep working. So we started enhancing them with artist graphics, with backgrounds for everyone. This is from The Smoking Car, one of the William Dean Howells plays that we presented.
It was wonderful.
And there was a sense of space, but it was very cartoonish. So the cartoonish part was a lot of fun, certainly, and would lend itself to some dramas more than others. Here's a little bit from Vote the New Moon, where we put actors into a very cartoony setting, and they could look at one another, but it was still very much the cartoon. We could also, rather Terry Gilliam-esque, introduce into it art, graphics that would play with the actors. And so here was the great fish that dominates in Vote the New Moon at the end, and the actor was responding to him. You'll still see that he's phasing in and out. We have the same problem with Zoom that everybody does, but he's responding to that creature. So, that was all great from a kind of cartoon perspective. But then could we do something more sophisticated or subtler? And we got to the Rachel Crothers play, The Rector. There were others that achieved this, and directors did wonderful work. But The Rector, I thought, was extremely beautiful, with virtual backgrounds by Medusa Studios that I made work. And here a couple actors sit down against their virtual background. And so that was a way of taking this medium and saying, well, how can we screw around with it and play with the fact of it? And it's half silly, but in some ways quite pretty. That's where that one stops. And I guess the couple latest iterations of it were being able to move the actors and stage them. Now, this is the year anniversary of He Said and She Said, where Mrs. Packard is about to leave the scene, and instead of just fading her out, I decided I could just run her right off the stage. And that was a kind of play with these windows that we hadn't experimented with before. But I will say that we keep trying to push it, and we did want to see if we could put people in the same space. And so here's the last one we did, a play called Mile 22, where you see a bunch of cartoon figures running past the actress, and there's a real actor just running past her. It's all done on Zoom. I mean, they're doing it live, they're in their apartments, and then he comes back and he has some things to say. So I'll give the stage to him, see if you can hear it. I hope that works.
Are you okay? Everything all right? You need the medical people? They're over.
So in that case, we really did try and put them in the same space together. The lighting was not good. We couldn't get that balanced in time, but it was this feeling that this medium allows all these different opportunities. And, there's still new surprises that can appear for us and disappear within the Zoom sort of format using all this, this play. And that's been the fun of it, constantly reminding people that we're using this and what can we do with it? It's theatrical, but it sure isn't theater. And it's not even very good film. I'm not pretending that it is. But I think the game for me has been trying to see, well, where can it go and what can we do in the world ahead, whatever that might be. So that's kind of a synopsis for me.
Well, Alex, whatever else it might be, it was utterly wonderful. It continues to be utterly wonderful. You've had thousands of viewers all over the world, and you've done so much to make things easier and lovelier and simply better. Now, I know the session is going well because we're just about out of time for this section, and I've only worked through about half my questions. I do want to return to Julia and Geoff, however, because they too have a video to share with us, or they have a video to share with us that I think speaks to a lot of the issues we're talking about, staging, directing, adapting, and so forth. Before I get to that, I'm going to put into a plug for my own, I think I can say was a budding career as an actor, especially for those of you who are looking to cast extremely handsome men in the early 30s. I did what I call my New York theater debut in Mile 22 as one of the runners. I haven't seen it yet, but I made the cut, didn't I, Alex?
You absolutely did. You're prominent.
I'm prominent. Yeah, I just bet I am. Okay, Julia and Geoff, if you will. You followed your Alice in Wonderland with the filmed version of Lisa Peterson and Dennis Hare as an Iliad. Based on the clip you sent me, it's 30 seconds. We're going to all see it together. It looked like a really full production, ambitious, and my knowledge of the play suggests, even on the basis that we clip, quite successful. Do you folks want to load that up, or should I do that?
We can try. We can attempt to do it.
You know, I can actually do better than attempt, so I'm going to do it.
Okay, great.
I'm going to just get it done here. Are you ready? It's a wonderful.
Silence. The arrows clanged at his back as the god quaked with rage.
And suddenly, a huge figure rises in
Over against the ships, he dropped to a knee. Tongue! Tongue! Whip! More! Stab! We all followed you to please you!
Dreams of men!
To fight for you!
Of triumph breaking in one. You see?
Absolutely wonderful. Tell us how you
did you all get sound? Because
could you all hear it? We couldn't hear it, but no, some could hear it, some couldn't.
Is anyone willing to pretend that they heard it?
Alex, for a future sharing, when you share the screen, be sure to share the computer audio as well. It's a separate checkbox.
Yeah.
But it looks fabulous, so no loss.
Well, you know, we're running out of time. I think that's the first big techno flub. Let's face it, Alex Rowe is a hard act to follow with the technical stuff. I do apologize, but this doesn't mean that we can't hear from Julia and Geoff very briefly about this. Tell us about an Iliad and how that worked. The cello was beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, we had originally planned the production for the season, for the upcoming season pre-COVID. So we were really lucky that it had already been something that was planned for us to do, and we had planned to double cast it with Geoff and an actress, Deborah Strang, to get a sense of how the play plays from the perspective of, you know, rage and the voice of a man versus a woman. So it had been planned for the season. So in some ways, filming it was, I wouldn't say it was an easy adjustment, but it made a lot of sense to us. And, you know, as has been said before, I think that we all had to very quickly understand and adapt to a different vocabulary. And we were lucky enough to have a really terrific director of photography who had never, interestingly enough, filmed a stage production. And I think that she was very respectful of the process in terms of always making sure that it felt like it was a play, that we were actually filming a play versus a film version of an Iliad. So I think that we ended up being very satisfied with the results, and that I think it captured the essence of the play, and it always felt as if you were in a theater. So when we started this process, to me, the production was a placeholder until we could be together in person. And after having seen the results, I was sold on the idea of filming theater, because I think the right projects can be incredibly effective in the medium. And I never thought I would feel that way, but after seeing the final cut, I very much felt like there was an opportunity there in the future for us as a theater to film productions that lend themselves well to that medium.
Well, Julia, thank you so much for ending with that, because you covered the bit about the future in the panel's title. So we couldn't have arranged this better. I wish I could say we'd rehearsed that, we'd set this up together, but that points us in a very nice direction, not only with respect to the future of theater, but with respect to the future of this panel. So this concludes the first section of the panel. So thank you, panelists, very much indeed. Okay, we now move into the second portion of the roundtable, when we open the floor to our wonderful audience and encourage them to ask questions of these absolutely fabulous panelists. David and Ryder both have their hands up. Who could ask for more? David, you're younger, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, in terms of going forward, clearly there's a lot of space here for filming of plays. I mean, both the things that you did at Noise for and then Eric's Ghosts of Playhouse have been really remarkable. But I also really appreciated the sort of Hollywood Squares talking head performances. I mean, the way I sort of began to think about this panel, I saw a production that A Noise Within did of The Price. And then also one that Annabel did for Bedlam of The Price. Very, very different productions in terms of the focus on different characters, but I thought absolutely worthwhile. So do you have any sense that you might go forward with Zoom productions also, or is that just not fit the business model of the theaters that you're trying to make go as commercial enterprises?
Speak up, folks. Jump up.
Yeah, sure. You were speaking to us, and who else, David?
Oh, and to Annabel at Bedlam. Annabel also did a production of The Price.
Annabel, would you like to go?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in terms of speaking on behalf of what Eric is planning for Bedlam in terms of Zoom readings, I actually don't have an answer to that in terms of whether future live productions will be filmed. That may be interesting. Bedlam's already gone one step further. Actually, they just did a production of Mary Stuart where they had 6 actors acting that entire production in a Brooklyn apartment. So we have somewhat moved on from the family squares reading that you were talking about. But like you, David, I liked the kinks in Zoom readings. I didn't mind the imperfections. I sort of felt like we were showing this window of how actors scramble around backstage sometimes. So I encouraged those kinks. I think there's an argument for things becoming much more polished and much more sophisticated. I personally was always a little reticent of that because I never wanted everybody to get audiences to get so used to this that we sort of felt, oh, this is okay, actually. Who needs the theater? Who needs to go into a space again? Let's just keep doing this. So I'm fighting all the way to get back in the room. But actually, just as a side note, I just read an interview with the artistic director of the Young Vic in London, Kwame Kwe-Amar. And he just announced, that every single production going forward, now the Young Vic has reopened, will be streamed. It's not even really about our artistic ideas about what Zoom is and what it isn't, but purely for accessibility in terms of the reach, in terms of people who can't get to a theatre, who can't afford the theatre, the cost of theatre. So I think that's also worth mentioning. We have our artistic goals and aspirations, but in terms of being more democratic, and egalitarian, I think it makes sense to continue to stream in some way. But I'd love to hear what Julia and Geoff have to say about that.
The filming process was really, really interesting. And we were very happy with the result, both with an Iliad and with Alice in Wonderland. We were very proud of both of them, but that's a very, very different thing than Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
I hate Zoom as an actor. I hate it. It's so unsatisfying. This is just me speaking, but I've heard it from many other actors too, who we've done Zoom readings with also. I mean, one of the things that is the joy and the magic for us as artists is being together in a room and trying to affect each other, seeing, smelling, almost tasting each other. That's the thing that gets our blood pumping. So with all of these technical difficulties, and as several people are saying, everybody's talking over each other and there's always a pause that you can't seem to get out of the Zoom thing, so timings are off and all of that. I find it to be very frustrating. I may be alone in that. Julia?
I'm with Ciarán when he spoke to the fact that, by the way, I saw The Weir and I thought it was terrific. That I believe that it's a lot, to me, it's a lot easier if it's a production that you've done. In our case, The Price was something that we had lived in. It was in the rep for almost, 7 years. And so it's so much in the actor's muscle memory and the depth of the work. It's not something that you can often capture in a reading when you've had 3 days to rehearse, is what we found ourselves, doing when we were presenting something new versus a production that we had previously produced. So I don't know. I think if you had a 4 to 5 week rehearsal period, I would have an appetite for it. But with those sort of 1 week turnarounds and present the reading, I don't find them terribly satisfying.
It sounds like then, even if they're somehow commercially viable, you can find an audience. It's just artistically so unsatisfying that it's just not worth engaging in going forward.
It depends on the director and the actor and the producer you talk to, but I guess this little box here, that's our answer.
Okay.
I obviously would not say that. I think that the two of them exist hand in hand. We have a large audience who will never watch anything we do online, so there's no fear of people wanting to come back to the theater, at least in this room. But as one supporter and audience member asked me, can we afford not to continue some sort of virtual programming? Our audience has expanded around the globe. We have support that we haven't seen before. It can be such a vital and interesting and engaging form if you can choke back your bile and enjoy it. And all the actors and directors I know, including me, feel like, oh, all these frustrations are absolutely there, but you can find ways of defeating some of the sense of distance and sort of lean in, as they say, to the satisfactions of it, even if it's just your family in California gets to see you acting in New York or in Berlin or wherever you are. I think there's certainly room for it. The question is, what are the unions? What are the finances? What are the economic models going to be to sustain it? At least that's where I'm sitting.
Right.
And there's also beyond the filming of readings, I think that there's a whole world has opened up that can really amplify the experience that our audiences have, whether it be an opening up post-show conversations on dates that people are not able to attend, but they can join a Zoom, a Zoom conversation, or in-depth panel in advance of seeing productions. I think that there's so much that has opened up, and in terms of our ability to produce virtual program, and also our audience's comfort level with it, that I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think every theater just has to make their own decisions about, how far they want to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see how that plays out. One of my pleasures during this period has been watching, and Alex, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but it seemed to me that the list of donors that you, with characteristic graciousness, append to your production, seemed to me they're just growing at a pretty good clip. It seemed to me you're not only attracting large audiences, but attracting audiences that were not necessarily expecting to get something for nothing. In music history recently, one of the really interesting analog is, as some of you will know, oh gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, Radiohead released their album In Rainbows online, Pay What You Want. And they made more of that off that record than they had on anything they'd released before then. Super interesting, I thought. Of course, I'm getting a number of wonderful comments expressing hope for what we in the Academy call hybrid models moving forward. As a teacher, I hear that expression in my flesh crawls. But as a theater lover, I have to say, come on, folks, give us everything. What else do we expect from our wonderful creative artists? We have two hands up here, Ryder and then Linda. Ryder, you were first. I'm going to call on my friend and colleague, Ryder Thornton.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Well, my question was very similar to David's, so I'm just sort of trying to tweak it a bit to maybe be more specific. So do people feel like, there's an aesthetic future with virtual productions, and streaming performances, and it seems like people went in different directions, whether you were filming a production and you had to engage with a production or a camera crew to do that, or whether you really got into virtual backdrops, like Alex and Ciarán did, or whether you did, I think what Bedlam did with Mary Stewart, where they just took the Brooklyn Walk, and I think it was only 4 actors you guys work with on that.
I think it was 4.
Yeah, but everybody sort of try to find an aesthetic or try to master this aesthetic in some way. And I'm wondering, it's a similar question, but is that something you're excited about and you want to keep working on, or is it just something you're going to leave behind and kind of just go back to the way things are?
I don't think
wants to maybe elaborate on some of the comments they were saying earlier.
Well, I'll just mention that we had a show that we actually did with Bill Irwin on Beckett in screen. So there's a case of point of a show that was a live show that we had originally did that we adapted then, and this was not green screen. This was actually on the stage of the Irish Rep, and we went and we filmed it. But it was a completely different relationship that he had before where he directed it to the audience, he was directing it to a camera, but it had its absolute own value in its own way. So I definitely see moving forward, number one, and it's something that I think everybody has talked about, is the audiences that we have now cultivated across the country and across the world, and that who say, please don't go away, don't when you guys open up, please don't forget about us out there. So from our point of view, we're thinking of ways, if the unions allow it to make it a feasible way to happen, that we will shoot them in an artful way, the shows that we do, and stream them perhaps for whatever number of performances after we close here in the city. That's what we're thinking these days. But
wonderful. I think that's an innovation and development that would be welcomed, applauded, and it's so comforting to hear that. Linda Kurloff, you have your hand up. What's on your mind?
Oh, I had raised my hand when I wanted to contribute to the conversation about whether or not performing on this level is satisfying. And I also agree that it's not as satisfying as performing live. However, what I do find extremely satisfying is the intimacy that you get with the post-show discussion. And I really hope that every theater will do it. Well, not every, but when the show is short enough, because it does give you the opportunity to engage in a discussion that's curated by someone, and then you get to process what you just saw. And sometimes that's even more interesting, not more, but equally as interesting as the production you just saw. And so I'm really hoping that theaters will offer a some sort of hybrid something. I mean, personally, I'm all for streamed live performances. If the union would do it, that's what I feel like that's how theater will stay alive. But that's my 2 cents.
Linda, thank you very much. And I'd be interested in hearing from some of our practitioners about the union. Is this going to work? Is this something they'll talk about, or is this just the kind of thing that Linda and I and many others like to dream about? Practitioners, let's hear from you about that, please. Yeah, no one wants to take that question. Annabel, go ahead.
I mean, I'll simply from an acting point of view, and I'm still a UK equity member, so not to compare too cruelly, but if the difference is night and day. And of course, staying in touch with my UK actor friends in terms of how the union affects things there, and streaming performances is entirely different. I think last year was very tough, very, very, very tough on lots of levels in terms of rules changing, and nobody was prepared for it. Of course, equity was certainly not prepared for how the world was going to go with streaming live performances. So I think they simply have to adapt and change, as we all are. And I don't think, just to talk about this idea that we're going back to how things were in every way, we can't. We can't socially, we can't politically, we can't racially, we can't, in terms of gender, we're not. And I know that's frightening at times to face, but it's not going to go back to how it was before. And I think that's very good on lots of levels in terms of how theatre stays alive, as our last question had just said. I mean, the National Theatre have been streaming live theatre for years. They reached, in England, and they've done it brilliantly. I think they're a brilliant model. They've been screening their shows around the globe. I don't know how many years now, but I think they're a great model of live streamed theatre. I think Equity and SAG, I think they are hopefully trying to work together in terms of, is this now a screen acting performance, so it falls under the jurisdiction of SAG, or does it fall under Equity? But I think there can't be any going back to how it was before, and Equity must adapt to that. And I'm trusting and hoping that they are, and they will, if theatre is to survive and if actors are to survive. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Linda, looks like you have a follow-up to that. Go ahead.
Simply piggybacking on what was just said, that sadly, audience members are recording Broadway performances and selling them online. And although I don't like it, it's out there. And I feel like our industry needs to reel that in by being the ones who create these things so that it's a quality performance that's being released to its audiences, as opposed to, people in the audience just recording a show and then selling it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, one of the other pleasures of the pandemic has been getting to know people that you don't really know or look forward to really knowing in the future. This is my segue into calling on Sue Abbottson, with whom I had the pleasure of working with on the Eugene O'Neill review, which he supplied an absolutely wonderful review. Sue's involved in the Arthur Miller Journal and a wonderful Miller Scholar and all sorts of things. And much more importantly, she has her hand up, or an icon up. So Sue, talk to us, please.
I do. And I have to say, I love the shout out for the National Theatre. I think the National Theatre productions last year got me through. It was just, I've just so missed being in the live theatre, and I certainly will be going back, but it's great to see the shows live streamed as well. And I think that does give greater accessibility. But my question is kind of backwards looking in a way rather than forwards looking. I'm kind of intrigued as to those of you directing, producing plays over this past year, as to what kind of things were you looking for in the plays that you decided that you would like to try and produce? I mean, is it sort of a play that only has 3 actors or only 1 actor? You know, were you thinking in terms of we really need some new material to be able to translate to this new medium, or were there certain older plays that maybe just lent themselves to this format because of the way they were written? I mean, I did notice an uptick in, at least with Miller, quite a few people were actually doing some of his radio plays because I think they just thought that might lend itself to Zoom. So I'll shut up and let's see if any of you have any thoughts about that. It's really, you know, sort of what guided you in the choice of the plays you were putting on? What kind of qualities in those plays?
Great question. Let's hear from you, folks.
Alex, Susan, I would say from my perspective, I went with small casts. I was interested, you know, because I put such a premium on actually having the actors together in some form. So I wanted to keep it small. In some cases, I tried to limit the rehearsal too. So I kind of adjusted my expectations about what I could do in rehearsal. And then I also have to say, and maybe I'm very fortunate with a lot of O'Neill material is public domain. And I didn't, you know, as we went along, I didn't know which direction things are going to go. Is this going to be recorded? This is going to be live? Is this whatever? And so to take that concern about the rights out of the equation was really helpful for me to do. And I would just add one thing also, which is that going forward, I kind of imagine, I haven't heard anyone say this yet, or at least I missed it. I want to keep the virtual things going because I just never want to be caught flat-footed again. You know, I want to have, I'm almost going to say that my virtual series would be like my black box series. So if something, you know, makes the lights go out in the main stage, at least I have something else going on.
Wonderful. And I know, Eric, one of the tricks that you pulled out of your hat that I thought was extremely effective in the Lost plays, you just got rid of a couple of characters. Worked really well.
Yes, and I heard, I think it was Geoff and Julia mentioned this in one of their earlier statements, but yes, you know, you have to just go through that. You have to find a script in which you can plausibly retain all the drama and yet find a way to not have anyone kiss or anyone actually fight or touch or get really close, and yet still maintain an honesty about telling a story. And yeah, so that was also really important, was sometimes I had to take a character out because I needed to work around something.
Ciarán, how would you respond to Sue's question? What are you looking for in plays now, or what have you been looking for in plays during this period?
Well, I'd like to say that I probably looked for plays where we had costumes on a rack. So that was one of them, and a Touch of the Poet had, you know, set in 1824, had a gorgeous collection of costumes that we just thought, you know, if we never get this back on the stage, let's give it a whirl in this way, you know. And we did not, because of the format that we were doing, and we were doing it remotely, we did not actually shy away from the numbers, because we actually did a musical, Meet Me in St. Louis, that had 14 characters. And it was 14 people singing at the same time. So that took a little bit of working it all out. And that show particularly was not one that anybody had done before. So it took a little bit of like the musical theater chutzpah of, let's get a show on here. It's like those people who can turn it around in a week. And we shot that one, but brought the orchestra onto the stage, and then recorded after that. I don't know that we were looking for themes. We were looking for diversity. We were looking so that we weren't doing the same thing over and over. So we did, you know, all the plays had a sort of something different going on. So,
and if I might just piggyback on Eric, we also, Susan, dealt with small casts because of the reality that some of our staff was on furlough. And we did not know where things were going to go financially. Everybody took a 25 to 30% pay cut, and a few people had to be furloughed. So we really had to watch our pennies, and things in public domain and small casts were very, very important to us during this crazy time.
Yeah. Alex, may I also throw in something about the choice? Our first consideration at the start, well, it turns out we will have done 100 shows by the end of June. So having something every week, and that was the mandate, you know, it was just, what can I do 5 days from now, or what can I do 2 weeks? But as we got used to it, we found a number of the Provincetown plays were really very interesting because of their challenging of social norms and theatrical forms, and that lent itself to this bizarre new medium. I didn't find anything was unproducible in that way. And sometimes, you know, as Eric says, you got to figure out how to make the kiss work or the violence. But we found it was exciting to meet that challenge. We also found we could do plays that otherwise short enough plays or more obscure plays that often benefited from the intimacy, such as certainly some of the Provincetown plays, but also plays of the pre-Harlem Renaissance. Your plays by Willis Richardson or Mary P. Burrell that we might not have, because they're shorter, we couldn't have developed a whole run around, but we were able to explore playwrights who have been unjustly overlooked, who have a dramaturgy that is subtler in many ways than those that we're used to putting on this stage. So it's not that we couldn't do them and we will do them in the future, but it was eye-opening into what we realized we could do, because there were many plays, including all the Provincetown plays, that we just wouldn't have considered before. So in a way, you know, it was more inclusive, and we certainly never shied away from 14-person cast. I think that was the most we had, but we had lots of people. And again, facing Zoom economics, not I've got a staff to support and I've got to get people together. I mean, that's always worth where I have to acknowledge.
Well, I mean, you did The People, Glasspool's The People, as well as a much smaller cast, The Verge, 2 plays by Glasspool that I certainly have never had a chance to see before. And I think I speak for a great many of us. I mean, one of the great advantages of this period, and our wonderful, the Eugene O'Neill's Review's wonderful book review editor, performance review editor, Bess Rowan would certainly echo this point. Been an awful lot of plays that that a journal like ours has been reviewing. It's been a remarkably busy, fecund period for, to use your word, obscure, or let's say optimistically, previously obscure plays, for which I, as a viewer, thank all of you. Getting low on time here, but we're never low enough on time not to hear one more time from David Palmer. David, give us a zinger and get us out of here on a wonderful note.
I'm not sure it's a zinger, but it is a question about going forward, that because you now have a much more national kind of, or much worldwide audience, a much bigger audience than you had before. Is there a space for plays that you couldn't have done in the past? Like, for example, a half-hour one act that is just mounted by itself and you sell tickets for under $10. And because it's such a worldwide audience, you can actually make that go financially in a way that you couldn't do that as a one-off by itself commercially in a live theater.
I'd suggest I'd like to go around to all the panelists, and Will, I want to get you in on this one too. And I'd like to hear short answers to that absolutely perfect final question as we look together into the future. I'm looking at my little boxes. Julie and Geoff, you're first up.
So here's a quick answer, yes.
Okay. Great. Okay. Alex Rowe.
Yes.
We're sort of losing some intellectual momentum here, but we're staying on schedule. Certainly worth it. Ciarán, go ahead.
Yes, I would say yes, and not just confine it to short plays. I would confine it to full productions.
Great. In context, that qualifies as voluble. Thank you very much. Will Long, let's hear an actor's perspective on that one.
Well, what I'll say is from a performer's perspective, I am not entirely dependent on theaters now to do my own performances, you know, whether they be monologue or short collaboration with friends. That's another, you know, kind of version of your point, is that the freedom to produce under different mediums in different ways is there are more opportunities. So yes.
Wonderful. Annabel, how about you?
I think it's a fabulous idea. I'm emailing Eric from Bedlam as soon as this discussion finishes to let him know. I'll tell you how it goes.
Wonderful. Eric Fraisher Hayes.
Yes, actually, one thing that this period has taught me is that sometimes theater comes in a 5-minute experience. Sometimes it's a half hour, and sometimes it's long day's journey into night. But I've really expanded my notion of the types of things that can be presented, and that really, I think there's a whole series of different durations for that.
Thank you so much, Eric. One of the things I've learned from my students in this difficult period is how to clap online. I don't know if grown-ups do this or if it's just college kids, but my understanding is that we do it this way. So I suggest that we all give finger snaps to our absolutely wonderful panelists, our colleagues, and from the bottom of my heart, theater practitioners, thank you for doing so much to keep the rest of us sane, stimulated, engaged, and plugged into meaning and beauty. We are, as always, in your debt. Thank you all for volunteering your time. It's extremely gracious of you. Audience members, thank you so much for your patience, your participation, for the wonderful chat notes that I'm getting. Just if I were Alex Rowe, I'd have the perfect wrap up, and I am, as they might say in classical literature, the lesser Alex. So thank you folks so much. I'm going to stop recording now, and it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
you.
What a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Bye.